Dark Imperium, Guy Haley. Part 1. The Death of a Primarch. 10,000 years ago. Chapter 1. Thessaly. The void is impossible for the human mind to encompass. Within the galaxy mankind calls home, there are 300 billion stars. Around these revolve hundreds of billions of worlds, and the spaces between are crowded by a diversity of objects which defy enumeration. Mankind's galaxy is but one of trillions of galaxies in a universe of unguessable size. The distance between even proximate astronomical bodies are inconceivable creatures evolved to walk the warm regions of a single small world. This is why the void cannot be understood, not by man nor by their machines. The Magi of Mars insist on their understanding, but their apprehension can only ever be an abstraction, dead numbers modeled by dead flesh cogitators. No matter how brutally expanded their minds, man cannot comprehend the majesty of the void. And when one considered the warp, the nightmare realm, skulking behind that wall of touch, sound, sight, well, any beings who claim the understanding of that is either deluded or is insane, and in both cases dangerous. Among the higher races there are those equipped to grasp their own limitations. They understand that the cosmos is ultimately unknowable. They accept their lack of insight. By comparison, the creatures of Terra are so crude in thought, in that the opinion of these more enlightened civilizations befalls them. It is a wonder that humanity can understand anything at all. Humans are beings of short reach. Give them void chips, change their shape by gene form and augmentic, provide them with weapons of sufficient power to break a star, and the children of old Earth are still but apes removed from the savannah. Just as an ape's mind cannot hold a notion, and the notion of a whole world is inexplicable to it, so man's mind cannot hold the void, and its layered infinities of the warp are beyond him entirely. The Imperium claims 1,000,000 worlds as its own. It is an empire spread gossamer thin across the run of the stars. Its worlds so far removed from one another that it requires the bloody effort of countless men and women to sustain in the grand flow of history. The Imperium is the greatest galactic empire of its day. To the people who populated it, the most powerful to have ever existed. However, to the uncaring universe, it is nothing, the latest in lines of such realms that stretches back to the days of the first thinking beings, when the stars were young and the warp was calm, and horror had yet to uncoil its tendrils into the material realm. There are philosophers that argue war is man's natural state. To inhabitants of this era of blood, it is a proven hypothesis. War is everywhere. Peace is the dream of a silent emperor, broken by his treacherous sons. Those sons continue to fight. Over the green gas giant of Thessaly, 2 great battle fleets engaged. Titanic energies snapped and blinked in the eternal night of space. The total efforts of star systems went into the construction of these fleets. Neither were free of the taint of blood, not in their construction, for tens of thousands of lives had been expended in their making, nor in their usage. The resources of planets had been poured entire into the forging of their frames. The secrets of ancient sciences plundered to bring them murderous life. Both had been responsible for the leveling of civilizations. The fleets differed in only 2 regards. First was their appearance. One was a gaudy assault on the senses, the other a motley collection of sober liveries. The second and more fundamental difference was in their allegiance. The sober fleet fought for the continuation of humanity's great stellar empire. The gaudy one was dedicated to its extinction. The battle fleets pursued each other in a slow dance that broke over Thessaly's rings. Hundreds of vessels, plowing gaps through the dust that would make centuries to close. The voiceless lightning of their guns filled the skies of Thessaly's inhabited moons. The lives of millions below depended on the outcome of the battle, but to the consequences would ripple much further. At the center of this iron storm there was no calm, no eye in which respite might have been found. Instead there was a pair of leviathans, the Ultramarines battle barge, gauntlet of power, and the Emperor's Children battleship, Pride of the Emperor. Two vessels, forged in common cause but now implacable enemies, locked together in mortal combat only 30 kilometers apart, no distance at all in Void War. Each was a flagship of a Primarch, genetically engineered demigods crafted by the Emperor of Mankind. Above the gauntlet of power stood Robot Guilliman, the foundling of Ultima, the avenging sun. The pride of the Emperor was home to Fulgrim, the traitor, the fallen exemplar, the blighted phoenix. Once covered in his Emperor's blessings, Fulgrim had followed the arch-traitor Horus and pledged his allegiance to ancient dark gods, become the herald of perversity. In fighting for their father, both Primarchs were made fathers themselves, though not of princes or strong daughters. Though the application of arcane sciences, they were the sires of two of the Space Marine legions, mankind's greatest warriors. The Space Marines were lords of the galaxy, designed to reunite the human race and shepherd it into a glorious future. Instead, they had failed, and turned upon one another. The war had nearly destroyed the Imperium. Such fury a battlefield can unleash. It can cower a wall without a shot. It can extinguish the life of species. Battlefleets are the tools of tyrants, whomever they fight for. Whether their admirals espouse salvation or damnation matters not to the execution of their purpose. Death follows in their wake. To those practicing a void war seems terrifying, rolling chaos of violence, but it's the pinnacle of mankind's destructive ingenuity, a wall of gigantic explosions where lives are snuffed out by the hundreds. In such combat, a single man is nothing. He is but part of a machine, of the ship he serves. As essential or otherwise as a steel cock or an indicator lumen, he can do nothing but work, his appointed task, and pray his life may not end. Of it must end, that does so in painless disintegration. A single crewman's task dominates everything, even his fear of death. There is no escape from service. War and his part in it are the totality of their existence. Yet, what is a void war to the timeless deeps of the blackness that envelops all these folding modes of light the sentient creatures battle so endlessly? A void war is a twinkle in the distance. It is silence. It is infinitesimals of matter sparking and dying, scintillas of metal, flesh, consumed by transient fires. The detonation of a battleship kilometers long is insignificant to a cosmos where the death of sun atomizes worlds. On a galactic scale, the loss of a warship and 10,000 lives is nugatory. It's a nugatory flash outshone by the billion-year candles of the stars. The inverse is true to a single man. His life is all that matters, for one life is all a man has, and he fears to lose it. Yet he must blindly serve in terror. The universe gives meager gifts, and it does not care how they are spent. Over Thesla, mankind fought in a civil war already centuries old. The Emperor of Mankind, a human with the power of a god, had tried and failed to unite humanity's scattered worlds so that the species might survive the supernatural threat of chaos. His sons, the Primarchs, godlike beings he had created to complete this task, had themselves been corrupted, and half turned against him. The Horus heresy, that war was called. It had ended the Emperor's dream. The heresy was part of a war that had continued for eons, and could continue eons still. To the beings of the galaxy, the war was everything. To the blank gaze of time, it was nothing. And yet, for all humanity's seeming inconsequence, the children of its greatest sun held the fates of two realities in their careless grasp. Robot Guilliman remained loyal to Terra. His ship was sternly decorated in gold, so much so that it rivaled that of Fulgrim's vessels in ornamentation. But whereas the gauntlet of power was ornate, the pride of the Emperor appeared vulgar. Its decoration had been applied with abandon. Everything that could have been adorned had been adorned. Back when the two ships had fought side by side, its extravagance had not been to the taste of the Ultramarines, who were born of the more solemn worlds. It was an affront to decency, added to and added to again, until Throdi obscured all trace of art. Neglect went hand in hand with his ostentation, and made the pride of the Emperor appear ugly. It was a decayed relic from a bygone age, like a theatre from a decadent century left to rot in the rain. However, the pride of the Emperor's ability to meet our destruction remained undiminished. At point-blank range, it traded punishing blows with the gauntlet of power as the ships slowly passed along each other. Huge cannons flared, exchanging projectiles the size of transit containers. The space between them became a deadly thicket of lance beams and laser light. Void shields blurred and sparkled with the dissipation of mighty energies. Multi-hued lightning silenced communication and burst subsystems with their feedback for thousands of miles around. Weaponry capable of leveling cities blanked and flashed on both sides. Around these metal behemoths, dozens of other ships struggled in cosmic silence. Some approaching the size of and power of the flagships in their own right. Without exception, those on Fulgrim's side were the damned ships of the Emperor's children. Though Fulgrim had lost his war and his humanity, his legion yet still held some cohesion. On Guilliman's side fought half a dozen successors of chapters of the proud 13th Legion, the Ultramarines. This solution had been the price of faithfulness to the Legion of Ultramarines, and though they were strengths in the smaller formations Guilliman had forced upon the Space Marines after the Great Heresy, there was also weakness. For all their Primarch's famed strategical genius, the Loyalists had been outmaneuvered and caught. The pursuit of the fallen Primarch had become a fight for survival. 3 fleet elements of the Emperor's children had pulled the Loyalists into space above Thessaly. Fulgrim had turned into his flight from Xolco into a devastating trap. Once Reboot Guilliman would not have made such an error. Perhaps the dire situation over the emeralds of Thessaly was a simple misfortune, and Fulgrim was no ordinary opponent after all. Should Guilliman fail, his history would surely be forgiving, if there were any good men left to right it. Or perhaps the truth was that rage clouded the avenging sun's judgment. Perhaps some dared whisper about Guilliman had allowed to his desire for revenge to overtake his reason. Robert Guilliman was stretched. Although several other Primarchs still stood as champions of humanity, the wounded Empire looked to Guilliman to save it. Every man has limits, demigod or peasant, and Guilliman's burden was the heaviest of all. He was the savior of humanity. The pride of the Emperor heeled over, bringing its portside weapon batteries into better firing arcs. Respawn, the gauntlet of power intensified its barrage, and the voiced shields covering the pride of the Emperor ventral towers winked out. Explosions boomed suddenly across the hull plating encrusted with gold and filth. An opening had been made. On board of the Gauntlet of Power, 100 of Ultramar's finest warriors waited on teleport blocks surrounded by buzzing machinery. They comprised 50 of the first company and 50 of the second, all garbed in the deep blue of the Ultramarines chapter. The white helmets of the first company's veteran Space Marines, recessed under the cowls of Terminator armor, looked out at hundreds of tech adepts and mortal crewmen laboring to prepare the Ultimate's way through the warp. The Space Marines of the second company were in standard power armor and were equipped with tall breaching shields by arming servitors. Their battle plate lacked the sheer thickness of Terminator armor, and the shields, though bulky, would increase their survivability in close quarters fighting of the coming boarding. Ammunition trains rumbled across the deck on plasteel wheels. Smartly uniformed Ultramarine chapter menials handed out munitions to their masters, while the enhanced warriors performed last-minute armor checks on themselves and their brothers. Chaplains strode from platform to platform, hearing oaths and affixing papers to armor with wax that hissed as they were impressed with sacred iron seals. Whether human or transhuman, every member of the chapter worked with perfect efficiency. Even so, as invested as they were in their preparations, all of them had half an eye on the grand archway leading onto the deck. The ship shook violently. Alarms blared. Lumens spat sparks and went dark. A section of gantry clanked down from the tangle of studs and pipes that clogging the ceiling high above. The crew continued upon its business with unhurried purpose. Orders were given to reroute power. Emergency teams of armored voidsmen and specialized servitors began cleaning the wreckage. All was restored to order. Such calm made it easy to forget the punishing fire that the ship was under. But there was no doubt that they were losing. This was not the battle, how the battle was supposed to be. From voxmeters studded into the columns and walls, a clip voice sounded. "Shields down on the pride of the Emperor. Prepare for assault." The words were swallowed by the clatter of preparation and tumult of war beating at the ship. They were not repeated, for superior hearing of the Space Marines caught them all. Clarion followed was shortly sharp and loud enough to be heard by mortal and transhuman alike. The servants of Ultramar stopped what they were doing and stood at attention. A towering figure, clad in the famous armor of reason, strode through the archway. On his left hand he wore the Hand of Domination. Belted at his waist was the Gladius Incandor. The bearer of these weapons was taller by far than the Invictus Surizane guarding him. He executed a power and purpose that halted the breath of the mortals in their throats. "First, Captain Andros. Second, Captain Thiel. Are your companies ready?" the giant called. The two captains crossed the floor to meet their lord. Second Captain Thiel was in power armor, heavy with honors, while First Captain Andros was completely enclosed in the hulking suit of Terminator battle plate. They saluted their father the Ultramarine way, one fist across their chest, a symbol of unity. "My Lord Guilliman, your veterans await your commands," said Andros, his voice ringing from the voxmeters set below his helmet. "We stand prepared, my Primarch," said Aegon Thiel, his voice rich and soft, with unmoderated by machinery. It was not very long after the heresy. Thiel was still young for a space marine, though his face was lined with cares. Guilliman looked upon his captains resolutely. The Primarch overtopped even Andros in his massive Terminator armor. He was a living god, humanity's might captured and molded as flesh. Thiel gazed, seemingly unable to take his eyes from the face of his gene-sire. Thiel was a good warrior, tested in battle many times, unafraid to voice his mind, and modest enough to hide the love he had for his lord, but it shone in his face like a light. "Such devotion they bear me," thought Guilliman, "even as I fail them." There were so few of his original legion left alive, and the replacement were born of a different, less certain era. Theo's regard was tempered by long friendship, and he had never lost his rebellious streak. The younger Space Marines were another matter. Guilliman remembered when his warriors had been less reverent. They had been better times. "We depart immediately," he said, his voice uncompromising. "The traitor will not escape again. The warriors of Styx chapter stand ready to aid us. We shall not fail. To your stations. Prepare for mass teleport." "My lord, they are prepared," said Andros carefully. "But the enemy will outnumber us greatly. I am concerned for our chance of success. What is the practical action should resistance prove overwhelming? It is Second Captain Thiel, in my opinion, that you should remain here. We shall occupy the enemy while the gauntlet of power withdraws. We cannot—" The avenging son cut Andros dead with a look. "Too much blood has been shed on my behalf. I will not shy from this fight," Guilliman said, and his tone would brook no disagreement. "There can be no retreat until the pride of the Emperor is crippled. I must face my brother and occupy him while these tasks are done. And I must fight him. I will kill him, or I will die in the attempt. I cannot let him escape unpunished again. My sons," he added, his voice softening, "it is only one way to escape this trap." Andros bowed in his helmeted hat. Thiel paused a moment, uncertain, before doing the same. Sure of their agreement, Guilliman took his helm from a grav platform pushed by two mortal men. He mounted the teleport platform, stepping directly onto it with no need of the steps that led from the deck, and turned to address his sons. "Now, my warriors, let us show my brother the consequence of turning upon the Imperium of Terror. We march for McGregor," they bellowed, and their combined voices were enough to drown out the thunder of battle. Guilliman's Invictus Surizane guard followed him onto the teleport pad. They formed the protective ring around him with their shields and power axes, held up in a shield wall in preparation for teleportation, directly into the jaws of battle. To those around him, Guilliman was an infallible leader, his abilities supernatural. Even to the rational supermarines, who believed the Emperor of mankind to be a man and not a god, it is likewise his Primarch sons a sense of near-religious awe had crept into their attitude towards him. It only became more pronounced since the last days of the heresy. But Robert Guilliman was not infallible. He knew this course of action to be fraught with risk. Andros had been right to raise a possibility of defeat. The Primarch only wished he could praise his son for his insight rather than dismissing his concerns. His campaign against the Emperor's children had to all purposes failed. Fulgrim had the initiative. Gilman's choices had been made for him. The pieces were set on the board. There was only one option. He had to withdraw. Currently, withdrawal was impossible. If the gauntlet of power broke off from the fight, then the flight of the Emperor would inflict massive damage upon the battle barge. Fulgrim would most likely attempt a boarding assault of his own, once their defense was shattered. Colyman could not allow his brother to do that at the time of his choosing. The Primarch's powerful mind had examined all possibilities. His own strategies would have him retreat quickly, forming a fighting regard that he might restore those of the ships that he could, minimizing the damage of the flagship by sacrificing many of his others. Spending the lives of other men to save his own was not to Guilliman's liking, especially when he saw a slim chance of true victory. He could not ignore the opportunity to slay his treacherous sibling. Guilliman had come to the conclusion that by defying his own tactical orthodoxies, he might surprise Fulgrim. It was a slant chance. Fulgrim might well have dropped his ship's shield on purpose, mocking reenactment of Horus' last gambit to lure the Emperor aboard his ship at the end of the Siege of Terra. Guilliman had his own plans. Several board forces with independent but mutually supportive objectives would teleport in simultaneously with his own force. Teams drawn from multiple chapters were tasked to head for the Imperium, the command deck, the Victorium, the magazine, the subsidiary command deck, and the main gunnery control. If only half of his strike teams were successful, they had a good chance of crippling the part of the Emperor from within. His warriors had orders to withdraw immediately once their objectives had been achieved. He would make sure as many survived as possible. He could not let his sons pay the price for his mistakes. He had to settle the reckoning for his own errors. Guilliman could not deny that he had been hooked and played like a fish. All he could do was struggle free and bite the one who snared him. "Make ready! We go to war," he called. At his signal, the machines of the teleport deck hummed into life. Giant reaction columns crackled with immense power, feeding the focusing rays that would tear open the veil between real space and the warp. They glowed with painful light. As they shone brighter, cools of materializing compartments were leached with diminishing prongs and fed into the containment flask, were twisted as if they were alive. So many of my brothers are dead, fallen to chaos, or lost. We assumed we were immortal. We are not. My time must come, but not today. Not at the hands of Fulgrim. The arcane machineries of teleportation whooped and hummed, and the deck vibrated with their activity. The tumult built to a crescendo. A booming crack and a flash of actinic light whited out the teleportation deck. Suppressant vapors gushed from wide-mouthed tubes in anticipation of fires from overstressed machinery. Human armsmen raised their shotguns in case of warp breach and demonic incursions. None came. Signal strobes blinked. Red, 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 then blue. Teleportation success. Teleportation success. Teleportation success, wrote a mechanical voice. The lumens came back on. Composite flask emptied to the sound of half-formed screams. Atmospheric vents drew smoke away, revealing empty pads. Adepts consulted vid screens and paper corrugator strips, and relief crossed their faces at the readouts. Robout Gilman and his warriors were aboard the Pride of the Emperor. That was end of chapter 1. See you on the next video tomorrow. Good night.